we were exposed to the basic concept of doctrinal legal research and various components which it has. One of its components is philosophical research. If we go to John Dewey's concept of reflective thinking, wherein he lays down the procedure relating to conducting of research, we find that first the researcher comes across the problem. He feels the difficulty, he identifies the problem, and he considers that a question is to be framed in order to resolve that issue or that problem. So he will convert that problem into a research question. Then the third stage is giving a tentative answer or a hypothesis. And the next stage is to collect a further data. Of course, hypothesis is also formulated not on the basis of some blind reasoning. It is done on the basis of preliminary collection of data. And at this stage of collection of data, also that thinking process will continue. At all these stages, when he goes on collecting data and analyzes data, etc., he actually involves in the scientific activity of dealing with the facts. But at higher levels of reasoning, in order to arrive at a conclusion or in order to theorize the facts, he has to go beyond that, and there acting only on the basis of facts will not help. That's why he has to philosophize, or he has to enter into a new thinking. This is how knowledge building takes place. Thus, at the higher levels of his research, when he involves in a philosophical discussion, then we said that he goes beyond the scientific facts or the factual details, and he tries to conceptualize and evolve certain conclusions on the basis of those theories. Thus, interaction between a fact and a theory, which had started quite early, is now going to a stage where he will be solely dealing with the theoretical understanding of the whole issue, and there he explores into value discourse and philosophical concepts. There's a whole journey of a legal research traverses through two levels. One is a scientific realm, and after that he goes to the level of a philosophical research. At all stages, there will be deductive and inductive logic being applied at various levels. See, the philosophical concepts that he would be evolving will not be entirely based upon the facts, but he will be making use of facts. The task of a philosopher is to examine whatever seems insusceptible to the methods of science everyday observation. What is not possible through science is to be now answered with the help of a philosophical inquiry. That's why philosophical research becomes inevitable. See, philosophical research actually adds to the very quality, worth and content of any research, for the reason that the theoretical soundness of his finding actually helps him a lot in a building the concept and in a projecting some of the new ideas. See, research involves a generation of knowledge. When a new concept, a new theory, or a new reasoning is to be evolved, then he has to go beyond the scientific facts. This kind of a venture that he makes in abstract things is something comparable to the instance where a giant flight, giant aeroplane at the very higher plane will be appearing as only a speck in the sky and penetrating into immeasurable vastness of the space, and that kind of abstractness of that object is something comparable to the abstractness of the concept that we develop in the course of philosophical research. But when an aeroplane has some connection with the ground reality, just like ideas are also factually and socially grounded. That is why the connection between facts and theory is something that ought to be properly addressed by the researcher. The philosophical research, as defined by certain scholars, would mean that it fosters a more complete understanding of the conceptual basis of legal principles and of the combined effect of a range of rules and procedures that touch on a particular area of activity. That is the explanation which Australian legal scholars provide. Kovler, in his book on philosophy of law, explains in this way: the purpose of a philosophy of law is to examine what underlies the realm of the phenomenon and to explain to us whether there are powers and what are those powers and behind what we have pursued with our senses and whatever reason which can be given to understand those powers. See, in order to understand the philosophy of law, one has to go to the basis of power underlying the law, how it operates, what is its basis, what is impact, etc. Thus, the researcher has to conduct research by looking to two aspects. There is one to the aspect of the theoretical dimensions of the question that he takes up for research, and secondly, in a purely jurisprudential discussion, he will be going beyond that, and he will be involving in a abstract philosophical discussion. Eyring makes that kind of a classification between a general jurisprudence and exclusive jurisprudential query, or a deeper jurisprudence. General jurisprudence and deeper jurisprudence. See, about analysis of law, finding reasons behind the law, and expounding the meaning of that law, etc. That will be the domain of a general level of jurisprudence. But philosophical basis for any of the concept, deeper understanding of the very law, legal concept, or its operation. All those things involve the higher jurisprudence. So lower jurisprudence and higher jurisprudence, that type of a classification he makes. Insofar as a legal researcher is concerned, in all research activities, certain amount of philosophical research is mandatory, or it becomes inevitable, unavoidable, because he has to involve in or deal with for the theoretical aspects. Even in a non-doctrinal legal research also, he will be making use of a theory. See, he will be proposing some hypothesis and he will be testing that hypothesis, or he will be evolving certain proposition in relation to any research question by resorting to inductive logic and trying to answer such questions in a theoretical manner. Thus, a sociological researcher or a legal researcher, they have to make use of these theoretical researches, and philosophy is something which is common to whole field of knowledge. What is a philosophy? Philosophy etymologically means a love of wisdom. Love of wisdom. So, love of knowledge, or going beyond knowledge, wisdom. See, when we say that knowledge is leading to some appropriate action and policy, then we say that it is a wisdom. There is a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Eliot, T.S. Eliot makes that a kind of a distinction between this knowledge and wisdom. Here also, we find that wisdom, which every knowledge seeker loves, is something to be established, or it is to be demonstrated through his continuous intellectual work. That's why mastery over that will yield him master of philosophy. Or if he is able to establish his higher knowledge, then the university may be pleased to award the degree of a Doctor of Philosophy. The word philosophy of Doctor of Philosophy or Master of Philosophy, those types of degrees have that kind of a genesis. Whether he is able to independently generate a new theory or a new knowledge or a new wisdom, that is the question which a university asks about the contribution of that researcher. See, about criminal law or civil law, intellectual property law, or about propriety of various types of policies, when some amount of theoretical discussion is to be made, yes, the researcher has to arrive at appropriate conclusions, and that involves a certain amount of, it involves a philosophical research at a higher level. But in the field of jurisprudence, that involves a deeper or foundational research, where about the very need for law, reason underlying the law, or the justification for the legal system, or the acceptability of that legal system in terms of values of the society. There, the researcher goes for a deeper philosophical research, and the researcher in the field of jurisprudence has to make use of such tools which are not ordinarily used at the lower level. See, when we ordinarily involve in a doctrinal research related to, say, death penalty, or say rape, or various other issues, or about the incoherence of judicial decisions or tendency of judicial decisions, etc., we involve in some discussion. Such deeper issues may not be there. But when the researcher takes up the issue relating to the very propriety of imposition of a death penalty. Then of course he involves in some philosophical discussion. See, that kind of philosophical discussion is not confined to legal scholars, because even other social scientists, philosophers, and other thinkers also pay thoughts about the propriety of say imposition of such a penalties, etc. See, legal research involves in a discussion about the human activities, and human activities invariably involve say dealing with some technical solution, or involving in a historical research, comparative research, or investigation about moral philosophy, or such types of activities. There of course when relating to ordinary human activities, also when theoretical discussion is to be made, certain amount of philosophical discussion becomes very much essential. Because whether it is at the lower level or a higher level of jurisprudence, philosophical discussion becomes inevitable. What are the features of this philosophical discussion? Of course, I will be planning whole of my exposition in this way. I will explain the features of philosophical research in law. Then I will explain what are the reasons which are compelled, or which compel the legal researchers to engage in a philosophical research, or what is the need for a philosophical research, and then what are the possible processes to which a philosophical research is conducted, and with the help of some examples, by resorting to reverse engineering technique, we can examine with the illustrations how philosophical research has been conducted by some eminent researchers, thinkers, and writers. About features of philosophical research in law, let me point out that first of all it asks the why question. Why this law, or why this proposition, or why there should be this kind of a policy, etc. See, science usually asks questions what and how, but philosophy deals with the why factor. Criminal Procedure Code would explain how, and Indian Penal Code may also lay down what punishment is to be prescribed, and what is it, what is a murder, what is a culpable homicide. Then why punishment is to be imposed. See, there, although we may get some clues in an Indian Penal Code, in the knowledge of criminology, or victimology, or from other disciplines, it is possible to gather certain ideas and overarch all those propositions and build up a new knowledge which can explain why particular punishment becomes appropriate in some situations, etc. See, there will be so many mitigating factors, there will be so many attenuating factors, aggravating factors, etc. And amidst all those factors, how balance is to be struck, at that stage, the researcher will have to invariably involve in a philosophical research. Whether it is a judge, or whether it is a academician, or any other person who involves in such a process of analysis, he has to make use of such a why question. Then this why question is something asked by various philosophers at various contexts and that has resulted in a, say, exploration of new principles, finding of new ideas, etc. Gautam Buddha asked the question, why is it that miseries occur and miseries haunt the human beings? Of course, when he went on meditating on that issue and put entire intellectual energy to come out with the answers to that question, then of course he found how miseries are to be avoided and to be dealt in the society. Then what is the relation between an individual and the Almighty, or individual and another individual? When that question was asked by Shankaracharya, it was possible for him to come out with an answer that between the individual soul and the universe, particular type of relation exists because of certain reasons. See, instead of going to such details, Swami Vivekananda tried to overarch various propositions and come out with some commonly understandable proposition, idea, that love, compassion, and equal respect for all. These are the ideals which make every individual happy. The whole essence of Upanishad, whole essence of Vedic writings, etc., are distilled into these propositions by his vast knowledge and overarching of all those principles. See, a philosopher has to have eye of an eagle, not an eye of a fly. A fly will be just looking to the details, whereas the eagle, because of its height and position, is able to look into the relations between various viewpoints, and it connects between various scenario, and it's possible for such kind of approach to evolve ideas, because the individual will not be concentrating upon the details, but upon the ideas behind that, or concepts or theories behind that. See, sometimes examiners write report, especially foreign examiners write their report to Indian PhD dissertations. The scholar has made a painstaking work of collecting the whole data and analyzed, and he has done wonderful work. But there is a central defect in this dissertation or a PhD thesis. The defect is that a new theme is not built, or a new idea is not built, or a new philosophy is not built, or a new concept is not evolved. It's a more explanatory or a descriptive, quite a logical narration, logical explanation, etc. But about giving a new idea or building up a new knowledge, that kind of a thing is not done. See, overarching of several propositions becomes very much appropriate or very much important in that task. See, about the concept of rule of law, there can be one view that rule of law means supremacy of law. That's a law shall rule. That's all. Of course, even Magna Carta also laid down that proposition that it's only in accordance with the law that any person can be arrested, etc. See, in a ADM Jabalpur case, there's the famous habeas corpus case. The minority judge, Justice P.N. Bhagavati, cites Magna Carta for a proposition that in accordance with the Magna Carta and the rule of law, the denial of a remedy by the High Court is the appropriate thing, because a right is suspended, and a necessary consequence of a suspension of a right is that remedy is also suspended. So Article 226 cannot be put into application. But Justice H.R. Khanna, the minority view, of course, P.N. Bhagavati gave majority view and H.R. Khanna gave the minority view. Minority view was that you have to look into the very validity of a law itself. And this kind of law which makes a remedy not available in a democratic society cannot be regarded as a law at all. It is a rule of good law that is implied in Magna Carta. It is not a rule of a mere law, rule of good law. And here he actually overarched or connected the principle of rule of law with the democracy, with the human rights, with the justice, and he tried to build up a new principle that rule of law means a rule of a good law, and this is the consequence, etc. So there is a lot of difference between looking to the matter of details just on the basis of analysis, explanation, narration, etc., and connecting between various principles and propositions so that a new idea can be formulated. But the formulation of that new idea is a challenging task. Halpin, in his article on philosophical research, makes this observation that an intellectual pyramid of a philosophy is to be dealt by any researcher in a circumstance where he is going to conduct research. See, if the human potentiality of the researcher is just limited to allow the floating of such a intellectual pyramid, it will just fly in the air, or it will just hang up in the air, and it will not be of any consequence. But if the researcher is able to build up the social relations or build up adequate sound theoretical principles to bring down the intellectual pyramid, which is usually in an inverted condition, then of course it is by indenting it into the earth that it is possible for him to maintain its balance. Indenting the inverted pyramid of intellectual concept into the present domain of knowledge, that is to be done with a deliberate effort of building adequate theoretical principles. Thus, it is essential on his part to imagine appropriately, reason appropriately, and build up that theory so that a sound foundation can be established. Thus, philosophical research is not something like a freak of imagination on the part of the researcher, but it is a realistic task of bringing down the whole thing to the earth in a pragmatic manner. That's why various scholars consider that philosophical research has acted as the driving force for various theories. For example, the social engineering theory put forward by Roscoe Pound considers that that notion is based on a new thinking. From the times of Greeks, there were so many efforts to build up the social philosophy, and the present social philosophy, which is put forward in this manner, that through law it is possible to engineer whole of social relations. That kind of a notion will become a realistic one when it is adequately supported by various theoretical supporting factors. Dewey consider that social solidarity is something that is to be built on the basis of division of labor. Again, he reasoned on the basis of that theoretical consideration. Then Karl Marx and other scholars, they also reasoned on the basis of such a philosophical reason. And H.L.A. Hart, while considering that rule of recognition, which ought to result in converting primary rule of obligation into a reality, is something that ought to support the legal principle. There also, by emphasizing on the factor of social acceptance, he laid emphasis on this theoretical discussion. In various other forms of research, it may be analytical research, historical research, empirical research, or comparative research. The element of theoretical element of this philosophical research is something there is a continuing, and of course another feature that we can find about the philosophical research is that it deals with the three types of specific categories. One is axiology. There is a science of values. Science of values is called as axiology. Second, it deals with the epistemology, and thirdly, ontology. See, about the identification of the values, as well as identifying the hierarchical relation amidst values. When a researcher involves in some analysis, actually he has to go for a theoretical discussion. Philosophical research becomes essential. Then epistemology is a science of knowledge. There the researcher will be making use of true belief based on reliable evidence as the instrumental factor for any coherent reasoning. See, Kant or various other scholars, when they developed their own specific reasoning, they actually made use of these logics. Then about the needs for conducting philosophical research, let me point out. The first need for conducting philosophical research is this: it delves into human transactions. Human transactions are dealt through evolution of culture, and it is on the basis of evolution of culture during several centuries of development that we can know various factors that have influenced the human thinking. Even relating to jurisprudence, we find that natural law ideology had dealt with various specific concepts. What is the law? What is justice? What is morality? And how protection of the life of the individuals shall be one of the important responsibility of the legal system. And each law has a certain purpose or yes, the researcher will be looking to whole of those aspects from the teleological perspective. Similarly, the schools of law which came subsequently also evolved ideas on the basis of their own understanding of the cultural development and social development, about custom as the basis of law, or about the need for making legislation and justification for such a legislation, etc. It is possible to find appropriate reasons only through philosophical research. There are about 10 reasons why philosophical research is needed. Professor, you were pointing out something. I could not get it.
Thank you. Some of the law professors are under the impression that law is different from social sciences. Right? We need to have different tools for doing research in law. And the tools which are devised and developed by social scientists would not be applicable to law. So my question is, can we analyze or understand law without having any interface between law and social sciences? The true character
Not
of
at
law.
all. See, law is one of the social sciences, hence it is not possible to make compartmentalized approach relating to law and other social sciences. Economics, sociology, political science, and various other disciplines have their own contribution to make, and even the pure sciences which have produced certain technologies or made various other contributions. Law has to deal with those aspects also. Thus, a compartmentalized approach is not something that would be possible. See, even in other social sciences, philosophical research is something not avoidable. That will have to be there, because some theoretical component in a social science research will be there. And in the field of law, it becomes inevitable for the reason that many of the concepts are abstract, and it is not possible to get a very concrete, clear, and very determined picture about those concepts. Maybe concept of justice, morality, reasonableness, or so many such specific concepts that are used. About that, proper understanding can be had only by looking to whole of a human experience in its entirety, and it's not possible to make that kind of a bifurcation between law and the social sciences. Of course, the tools which are employed in the social sciences become relevant in the field of law, mainly for this purpose. Yes. Law is one of yes, law is closely related with the morality, and because of its close connection with the morality, so many issues relating to morality will have to be tackled by the legal researcher by resorting to philosophical discussion. See, what is the basis for morality? Maintaining a proper order, or a fairness, or a appropriate regulation, and amity. These are all the factors which determine the basis for morality. What is good for an individual, that's called as ethics, and when it is accepted by whole of the society, it becomes a moral principle. And when that moral principle is accepted by the legal system, enforceable through its force, it becomes law. Thus, morality is something closely connected with the law. Relating to morality, the philosophical discussion which a researcher will be taking up maybe this. If there is a conflict between a law and morality, what is the method of resolving it? See, the common interland for law and morality may be the factors of social acceptance. Then, what is the exact relation between law and morality? There is the famous debate about morality between Hart and Fuller, supported by Devlin, J. Mill, and various other scholars, or their ideas also included into all those things. And you want to explain about that? See, law's morality, or law's justification, or law's basis in a, say, human rights, justice, welfare, and well-being of the society. These are all values which support law. Whereas the factors which are insisted by morality may be asking for a deviation from these values of freedom, equality, human rights, or justice, etc. See, in such situations, actually there is a need to resolve the conflict, and the researcher has to involve in a philosophical discussion in such circumstance. Let me explain. See, relating to the issue of same-sex marriage, or criminalization of suicide, or criminalization of abortion, then passive and active euthanasia, permissibility of euthanasia, or surrogate mother's rights. About all those things, we come across deep controversial issues. And controversies arise because of some of the moral considerations which the society poses in favor of a certain posture, or certain stances, or certain positions, quite distinct from the position which law in its commitment to the fundamental human rights values may be taking. See, if we go for an analysis of cases, we find that in most of the cases, the court tried to resolve this conflict by adhering to the moral principles rather than upholding the principles of either equality, dignity, privacy, etc. Because sometimes there is an explicit preference of a moral principle over right. For example, freedom of religion is conferred subject to morality. Then the consequence is that when religion's morality is something which conflicts with the morality of the society, then the legal system will be upholding the constitutional morality, or a morality which is recognizable under the constitution. Because it's a commitment to protection of human rights or equal rights of all, that becomes paramount. See, relating to identification of obscene publication, or about discontinuation of a life support system to the terminally ill patient in a coma condition, or homosexuality, or say commission of suicide, etc. In all these cases, if you look to the ultimate outcome of the judgment, you will be finding that it is the principle of morality that is preferred rather than the right which is recognized under right which is elicited under the constitution. Of course, the court interpreted the constitutional principles in such a way that the morality was not something that could be disturbed. That's when the researcher has to deal with these issues, he has to go for a philosophical research only. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court's approach or the approaches relating to these issues are correct. I'm only pointing out that in the course of analysis relating to these issues, the researcher invariably has to enter into the realm of philosophy and involve in such a discourse relating to the values, because ultimately the value of a dignified life, value of liberty, or a value of equality, or value of justice, that shall be upheld.
Sir,
Yes.
how to rule out the subjectivity or biases in case of doctoral research? Because doctoral research has been claimed for that subjectivity by various scholars.
See, subjectivity is to be dealt by emphasizing on objectivity, and objectivity is to be promoted by emphasizing on the value neutral principles. And of course, various factors which distract the individual from objectivity. There's his personal commitment or his personal inclination, because of his membership to particular type of section of the society. That ought to be, that influence ought to be minimized. See, when a person belongs to particular sex, place of birth, religion, language, color, caste, etc. So he develops a proposition that whatever may be the truth, or whatever be the right thing or wrong thing, since I have to uphold my community, or since I have to uphold an ideology which I have pursued so far, I should adopt this particular course of action, or I have to decide in this way, or I have to analyze in this way. These kinds of prejudices result in a subjectivity. That subjectivity is to be totally avoided, and that is to be done with a high amount of intellectual discipline on the part of the individual, and by a commitment to all those scientific methods which are available, so that he can be free from various types of prejudices. Why subjectivity arises, or why prejudices arise? They arise because of man's commitment to, or man's inclination to uphold a particular viewpoint. Yes.
Sir, can I say? I know one scholar, and the scholar is dead against death penalty. He has conducted some research, and his findings are are the reflection of his ideas. That he is dead against death penalty, so death penalty should be abolished with no justification is given. So if that is the case, how to take care of all these issues?
See, such kinds of ideological prejudices ought not to enter into research, and I cannot consider it as a very appropriate approach on the part of the researcher to have this prejudicial view prevail even for various scientific factors that are available before him.
But we cannot stop anybody from doing research, no, sir. The person is, person is saying that okay, death penalty is not right. So, and there are reasons to say that, because whatever death penalties are there in place, they are against a particular set of people. So obviously there are reasons to do that. Maybe that this is some level against doctrinal research.
The data must speak for them. The data must provide some analysis. Not the individual's feeling or emotions are reflected in those findings. Sir, thank you.
The third reason why we should go for a philosophical research is this. According to Kohler, various logical and illogical elements pose certain difficulties in our day-to-day life. See, for the sole reason that a particular geographical area is a desert or a forest or a, say, mountainous or a plain or a full of mineral resources, etc. It may have its own economic scenario. See, in such a situation, it is beyond the competence of any individual or the community that the reality of such a situation will be influencing the economic factor, either affluence or impoverishment arising out of availability or non-availability of resources arise beyond the competence of the community. This is an illogical factor. Dealing with such illogical factor, how the legal system should go ahead. There he has to make use of philosophical research. Similarly, time is an illogical factor because it acts in a harsh manner and in a relentless way. And there are so many issues arising out of the factor of time. See, law of limitation, or the issue of a minority, or all the disadvantages arising out of old age, or the factors related to hours of labor, or determination of a question relating to sequence. All these factors lead to some moral questions, and those moral questions can be answered only by engaging in some philosophical discussion. Kohler gives the example of a Draupadi question. What is the Draupadi question? See, after the derobement or effort to involve in that derobement, Draupadi asks this question: whether the person, whether the husband who was forced to be a slave can also render his wife a slave. See, when he was a free person and when he had a certain amount of right, then staking his wife in the course of gambling may have certain justification. In case we believe in the idea that the woman is a property of the husband. But when he has lost even that by becoming a slave, can he put a Draupadi into that kind of a Dyuta or that gambling act? See, a whole act of gambling or putting a person as a property for gambling as a stake, etc., these are all unjustifiable, or these are all against morality. But here the question of a sequence arises. If the occurrence of the event related to enslavement that had occurred prior to the defeat or after the defeat, then there is a difference. So that moral question can be examined by resorting to the philosophical inquiry according to Kohler. Kohler was a German scholar who wrote the book Philosophy of Law in the 19th century, and he makes a very good discussion about all those facts. then chance is another illogical matter. See, by chance there may be occurrence of say natural disaster or so many other types of instances, and how to deal with that. See, there one has to resort to some philosophical discussion about the either yes, about the avoidance of such a incidents, or the most equitable way in which such a disaster could be dealt. That all persons shall be protected effectively, etc. Then there may be so many deficiencies in the practice of law which may have to be dealt through the philosophical inquiry. For example, technology provides a new answer, I mean a new method of dealing with any of the issues, or say it provides a new mechanism, new instrument, or a new knowledge. For example, in the field of gynecology, about identification of the sex of the child is a technology which is developed in course of time. Now, when that is abused, there ought to be a law which ought to deal with such a situation, and how law has to humanize the consequence of a technology. About that, any effort is to be made only by resort to such a philosophical discussion. Of course, the technology is to be followed by law. Law cannot, law cannot precede the technology. Law has to follow technology. But when a law has to follow technology, the disturbances that the technology has made, there's a, of course, whether it is related to possibility of environmental destruction or encroachment on privacy or health and various other things. These are to be effectively dealt by the society's commitment to the basic civilizational values. The basic civilizational values like a right to health, or a right to peace, or a right to environmental protection, etc. All these values are prevail. Thus, we have to think in terms of the prioritization of the basic values or other achievements of the civilization. And in those circumstances, it is a philosophical research which comes to the help of the researcher. Human being is a bundle of contradictions, good things, bad things, so many proclivities, and there is a need to control the behavior of the individual, and there is a need to support the activity of the individual so that he will be able to develop his personality, and he will be able to live a life of harmony. In such circumstances, again, it is a philosophical research which will provide certain input for the researcher. Then group life has developed certain cultural norms. Along with the cultural norms, cultural faults have also come into existence. And some of the cultural faults may be instance of say gender prejudice, or say various other types of practices which are relating to those cultural faults might be causing certain difficulties, because they will be threatening the very existence of human rights or those values, and in such circumstances, to prioritize the civilizational values, one has to go for a philosophical research. Then we come across a number of concepts. Concept of justice is one thing, and about justice we come across hundreds of books, so many propositions, so many ideas, and all these propositions have their own reasoning, and to understand justice from different perspectives, one has to know the theoretical underpinning behind it. See, to understand justice only as a concept that will set right the wrongs by imposing punishment, or by providing a remedy is not sufficient. Because the factor of economic justice, the factor of social justice will demand for certain new types of remedies to the affected people. Similarly, each legal system, I mean, each law has its own philosophy. In the morning there was a discussion that to conduct research in the field of a contract, there should be a tool which is different from the tool that is employed for conducting a research in a family law or a criminal law or a labor law. The reason is that underlying each law, there is a distinct philosophy. What is the basis of family law? See, it's regarded that love is the basis of family. Because occurrence of family is something traceable to love. Natural love and affection is the basis. But whether love and affection provide any kind of enduring support to the family, whether we can say that only on the basis of love the family survives. Now suppose you said that no, law has to interfere, law has to support the family by providing some kind of assistance to overcome absence of love or presence of cruelty or such relations, etc. Then there would arise another question: whether the law is powerful enough to counterweigh all those cruelties that occur within the framework of the family. The answer is no. Then is family law really a law at all? Because if through law, if it is not possible to compel a husband to love his wife or a child to love the parents, etc., then law becomes powerless, and then of course there ought to be application of the factor of love, which will be supporting the civilizational values. What is the basis for a contract? What is the philosophy of a contract? If you understand the philosophy of a contract, perhaps you'll be able to analyze various relations between a promise and promisee in a more appropriate manner. It is regarded by scholars like Justinian, Rusco-Pound and others that inclination to keep the promises and security of the society in a having an atmosphere where promises will be kept, because Justinian viewed that let the promises be kept. That is the essence of a law of contract. See, then of course making the contract or interpreting the contract or dealing with the various issues related to contract, one has to go to that philosophy underlying the contract that primarily it emphasizes on keeping of the promises. What is the philosophy underlying labor law? See, labor law stands against the commodification and marginalization of labor. It justifies a humanized treatment at workplace and supports to bear job-related losses. If that is the essence of a labor law, in the course of researching in a labor law, you have to keep that philosophy in mind. Thus, a philosophical researcher actually helps in that way. Similarly, constitutionalism provides a rich philosophical discussion about the socio-political issues, enduring values, etc. And we have to look into that in order to conduct research. Then various concepts like property or duty, right, obligation, liability, all these concepts can be properly understood by looking to the philosophical discussion. See, about the property itself, there are certain views about the status of a property, whether the property is something subordinate to right to life, or is it even prevailing over right to life and personal liberty. There was one view that property is the absolute right of the master, the owner of that property, and the interest of others or impact of exercise of a property right upon others is not a factor that would influence the right of the property owner. That's why slavery was justified. But there is a legal system. See, English legal system in 18th century came with a principle that amidst liberty, there cannot be scope for slavery at all. Because English air is too pure to be breathed by any slave. Let the slave go free. That's what Lord Justice Mansfield ruled in Somerset versus Stewart judgment. See, in 19th century, in a republican constitutional system in America, there they justified slavery and they nullified a legislation which actually provided a manumission of the slave who escaped from a state where slavery was practiced to a state where slavery was abolished. There's a Sanford case. See, there's what is the status that we give to any of the specific consent, or how do we value particular consent? Do we value the contract right or property right in a far more superior way than the liberty or various other freedoms or welfare or some other issue or even a right to health? See, there the researcher has to involve in a philosophical research. Then what is law, what is the purpose of law, what is the purpose of legal system? So about this, when so many schools of law have come out with so many findings, it is done on the basis of that a philosophical discussion only. That's why philosophical discussion becomes inevitable. How exactly this philosophical discussion is philosophical research is conducted? This is a question of a procedure. See, we come across different techniques which are used by the researchers in the field of law in engaging in a philosophical research. There is no say hard-bound or a rigid formula about the way in which philosophical research is to be conducted, but it is possible to find out on the basis of various products of philosophical research that intuitionism, dialectical method, reflective thinking are the major processes or procedures through which research is conducted, philosophical research is conducted. Intuitionism. See, basing on reasoning in an emotion or feeling about a sense of good or bad, that is actually intuition. Radhakrishnan viewed that intuition enables us to penetrate beneath the outward experiences studied by science and see the life in things. It is a matter of experience and insight which is coercive and certain. See, when a person empathizes or feels oneself with another human being or a community or any victim or a person who is subjected to certain disadvantages, then of course the product of that response is intuition. That's what Rabindranath Tagore views about intuition, because through application of his inner self deep component, by partnering with another individual, the thinker will be empathizing and coming with some intuitionistic views. There's a choice of value as choice of any specific value as a good value or an acceptable value, this is based on intuition. See, when a rape occurs, then people would be saying that this is a preposterous, this is bad, or this is unjust, this is unfair. See, spontaneous outcome of a person's emotion about the situation, asserting a specific type of value, that is the intuition. So, so many of the philosophical findings relating to values are based upon intuition. This is one particular viewpoint. Natural law scholars consider that intuition is the method of philosophizing. See, they view that law is a dictate of right reason. See, Cicero viewed that. Actually, that expresses the intuitionist way in which he considers that law is something, an outcome of a person's determination, his emotion or his feeling. See, there is essentially nothing which is good or bad, but it is a thinking which makes it so. See, it is the thinking of the individual that this is good, that gives rise to a proposition that it is good. John Rawls develops the idea of justice or his theory of justice largely on the basis of intuition, because he looks to the issue of the unequal contracts or laborers not being paid with the wages, or women deprived of certain rights, or say black men deprived of certain rights, and against this he reacts and he lays down two specific principles of justice, two theories of justice. Insofar as rights are concerned, rights and liberties, there shall be equality, and if at all any differentiation is to be made, the least advantaged person shall be given the greatest benefit. That is the second principle. First principle is a principle of non-discrimination. Second principle is a principle of justice. Substantial justice, substantial
So
equality.
how is this to be applied, the intuitionism? I mean, partnering with
See,
victim or what?
John Rawls arrives at this conclusion on the basis of intuitionistic analysis. I read the whole of his book on theory of justice, and there is one specific section, intuitionism, and for a whole of his finding that there shall be theory of equality, he reasons on the basis of intuition.
Or does it mean identifying oneself with the subject or the respondent, or
Yes, one will be empathizing with the deprived persons.
or would
See,
it mean the
workers who are
analysis?
not given wages,
Would it be
or slaves, the Negroes or African Americans being subject to lot of discriminations. See, or women who are victimized because of a denial of rights. These are all situations where the concerned scholar empathizes himself or feels himself one with those deprived persons and arrives at a conclusion that this is not something desirable.
it's through analysis of some similarly situated
Yes.
victims or so?
Yeah.
Through analysis we are. Intuitionism. It has to be through analysis. We have to arrive at some derivation or so. How we have to derive?
See how intuition occurs. It's a hunch. It's an individual view.
Natural, yes.
Individual view in what way? Individual view by empathizing oneself with the others. That is intuition. See,
So, how would we differentiate from participant observation? In participant
See,
observation,
participant
there are
observation,
someone partners with the victims or so lives with them.
participant observation may involve some amount of intuition, because when we participate and when we observe that there is occurrence of a particular type of act, say there is a witch hunting. Suppose the researcher conducts a research about a witch hunt, and he comes across the situation of declaring a person as witch, and he or she has a sympathy with that person. This should not have occurred. See, she ought not to be blamed for say sudden death of say cow or some animal, or for loss of some employment or some other thing, or say incident of a fire or some other accident. The woman should not be blamed. She is not the reason for that. See, that is the intuition. Because one will be sympathizing with that individual and coming to a specific conclusion that a particular type of a policy or act is not appropriate.
Sir,
That is intuition. Yes, yes.
I do not know whether my understanding
Yes,
is
yes.
correct. Kindly correct me.
No.
So here we are discussing different tools of philosophical research.
Philosophical research.
And
There are other
Others
tools.
also.
Other tools I will make it clear.
Yes. So you
See,
say
dialectic method is another tool, and how dialectical method is better than intuitionistic method. About that I will explain. Then whole idea will become clear to you.
Sir, you said
Yes.
actually intuition made Justice Rawls, wrote on, that made him write about theory of justice.
Yes, yes, yes.
Am I right?
Yes, yes.
So that way, this you are citing
Because
as an
it is
example.
a major source of reasoning
Yes.
on the part of John Rawls is intuition.
So this you are
But-
citing as
but-
an example.
Yes, I am giving
as
an
a tool of
example.
philosophical research.
Yes, yes. See, but he did not entirely base on intuition,
Yes.
because he went beyond,
Yes.
and he cross-checked
Yes, yes.
with the comparative study and some other things, and ultimately he arrives at a conclusion that
Actually, intuition was one of the tools.
that is a major tool,
Major tool.
because that is the starting point. In the beginning of his writing, in a third chapter also, third subsection, he deals with the intuition as the method, intuitionism, and major part of his writing actually provides that kind of thinking. See, this is to be contrasted with the dialectical method, because in Amartya Sen's book, there's the idea of justice. We come across a dialectical reason. First, let me complete my discussion about the dialectical method. Then, no. See, I am actually explaining intuition as well as a dialectical method with the help of some examples. See, John Rawls' book, then Martha Nussbaum's treatment of justice, then Amartya Sen's book of idea of justice, then Professor Upendra Bakshi's book on human rights. Of course, Bakshi's book on human rights is an excellent example of dialectical reason. About that I will explain later. Now, the second approach is a dialectical method. This is an important approach in a philosophical research. It started with the times of Socrates. Socrates involved in a discourse based arguments. Either one or more, of course, two or more persons will involve in such a discussion, and they will arrive at such deliberations, see, one viewpoint will be put forward by one individual, that will be controverted by another individual on use of a different reasoning. For a particular thesis, there will be projection of antithesis, and the outcome may be in the form of a synthesis, or it may be acceptance of a thesis itself, or acceptance of an antithesis itself, depending upon the outcome of that argumentation. See, this kind of a dialectical method of reasoning is something that can be found in say Indian writings also, or in writings in Germany. Hegel's method of reasoning is a dialectical method of reasoning. See, Karl Marx differs from Hegel. He says that between thesis and antithesis, the interaction is to be understood in a different way, because the outcome of an interaction is not necessarily either a rejection of a thesis or antithesis, but it may be affirmation of the economic reality in the ultimate analysis, and it should be. That's what Karl Marx points out. So in that way he differs from that. But another scholar, Karl Popper, he criticizes the approaches of either Karl Marx or Hegel, and points out that there may be intrusion of a third element. See, between the interaction between a thesis and interaction, the interaction might be influenced by the introduction of a third element, because of which there will be a third outcome, a new outcome altogether, or there will be either a rejection of a thesis or a rejection of an antithesis also, and synthesis cannot be considered as the invariable solution in all circumstances. The third method of reasoning in a philosophical research is reflective thinking. See, reflective thinking is thinking with the asking questions. See, any researcher has to proceed with his research by asking questions: why, when, who, what, etc. All those questions will be making the researcher to find answers to various issues around him, and at all levels of research, this questioning process should continue. Not only introspection, questioning each and everything, questioning answer, and questioning question itself. And if a hypothesis is formulated, questioning it with alternative propositions, and if ultimately conclusion is arrived at, even a conclusion may also be questioned, because all conclusions become only tentative, because that may be a starting point for a new research with a new hypothesis. A conclusion may become a hypothesis for a new research. Thus, reflective thinking has its own method, where the researcher will be going on asking questions in order to make it an orderly exercise. He may formulate some hypothesis. For example, how exactly to promote education system which promotes world peace, education for world peace. So this is the object that is to be promoted. How it is to be done? See, the researcher may go on asking questions to hundreds of persons. He identifies as many as 650 educators. How exactly, relating to promotion of world peace, you will be setting tone for education, in case you are given the liberty of setting the policy of education. About that, you may be collecting so many answers. He may be analyzing, synthesizing, and testing the hypothesis with the help of those answers, and ultimately he will be arrived at a specific conclusion. This is reflective thinking. See, a nucleus of idea in the form of hypothesis will be helping the whole research because it provides some direction, and this is the third method of conducting philosophical research. Another method is by involving in linguistic analysis. See, legal principle is stated in some statutory provision, or in some judgment, or in a specific proposition. In which language that it is used, what the implication of that words, how it is to be interpreted, and how to find the meaning of that word. Because every word is born in a world. See, when a word is employed, the person who employs that word as an author, and a person who receives that word as a receiving communication, and the third person who interprets that word in his own understanding. All those persons have to understand the word in the same sense that the individual had used that word. Since the social circumstance in which the word is formulated by the author is to be properly understood, the researcher has to engage in a linguistic analysis of the words used. Then reasoning by analogy is another method. This is a bit controversial because some scholars consider that reasoning by analogy is appropriate and that can be used. Scientists, even scientists consider that analogy can be used because by resorting to similar type of exercises, verification, etc., particular proposition will be proved. And Priestley, a famous scientist in the field of chemistry, he actually affirmed this idea of analogical reasoning. But Jeremy Bentham considered that reasoning by analogy is dangerous. It is artificial. Why you consider that this particular analogy is appropriate? It may be different. When there is no correlation, when the subject is different, or when the analogy is far-fetched, then application of analogy becomes illogical and it is inappropriate, and that ought not to be used because it is dangerous. There is a genuine Bentham. But we find in a common law that analogy is the usual method because the whole law of precedent, ad similia similibus, let the similar cases be decided similarly. This is based upon analogical reasoning. Another method is a history of ideas. How exactly an idea is born, and how that idea underwent several phases of development, and how ultimately it emerged. About all this, we can have proper conception only by resorting to history of ideas. Literature review may provide certain clue about the way in which a philosophical discussion can be carried. Now, how between intuition and intellect, or a dialectical method, proper reasoning can be made, or say preference can be done. About that, we can have some examples from actual research works. John Rawls' theory of justice. There, of course, I have already explained that intuitionism was the main reasoning that he employed to arrive at the theory of justice. But he is not averse to comparative method, or say dialectical method. But his main tool is this when he actually makes use of intuition. I have cited exact pages in which he used intuition as the major tool of his reasoning. See, intuition was also a factor which influenced Rabindranath Tagore. Of course, as a poet, he reasoned in his own way. Of course, according to Frankfurter, researcher should have the capacity of a scientist by collating relevant facts and making analysis in a scientific manner. So he should act as a scientist. Secondly, he should be a poet. He should have a heart of a poet, because he should empathize with the society and look to the feeling of the society, especially when a feminist research is to be conducted or a sociological research is to be conducted. Empathizing with the society is quite important. That's why a researcher should have a poet's heart. Thirdly, he should have the vision of a predictor or a prophet. A prophet is able to predict that this is the thing that will take place, because he can look to the future. He should have that vision. See, Tagore as a poet, on the basis of intuitionistic reasoning, writes in this way in his poem. Let me read, because it is a very small couplet. Thy rod of justice thou hast given to every man on this earth, and thy command is to strike where it is due. See, it is the responsibility of every individual in the society to make use of this rod of justice, because rod of justice is something entrusted by God to all, and when a particular thing is due, resorting to that's very much appropriate, and that's a duty, because justice is rendering to each person his due. That's the minimum concept of justice. But at the end of that poem, he says that let thy wrath burn him into ashes who does what is unjust or suffers injustice to be done. See, here he becomes retributive in his spirit. As a person who has done something wrong, who has done injustice, he should be burned down to ash. See, relating to imposition of death penalty, whether same approach could be regarded as appropriate. See, any outburst out of anger or some emotional outburst exerting certain type of consequence, that may not be appropriate, because there may be an alternative reason. See, this is one viewpoint, that he should be burned down to death. But there can be another proposition, another argument, that see, there are so many mitigating factors that should be taken into consideration. Or why to kill? Justice Leela Seth would say that it is only God who has given a right to life, and except God, nobody has the right to take away the life of any individual. So there can be an alternative reason, or there can be a reasoning that of course he might have done wrong, but every sinner has a future, and he should be reformed. Instead of killing, reforming that individual is a more appropriate way of dealing with the thing. See, all these alternative ideas come through dialectical reasoning. That is the difference between intuitionistic reasoning and dialectical method of reasoning. That's why dialectical method of reasoning provides for an opportunity to cross-check. It provides an opportunity to verify, because there is an alternative viewpoint. Because if all such alternative views are there, dialectical method of reasoning is there, then possibility of error can be avoided. See, Nussbaum continues the idea of intuition itself, but she deviates from Rawls to some extent, and she employs more component of dialectical reasoning. When it comes to Amartya Sen, he is a argumentative Indian, and he makes use of this reasoning in this way. Reasoning is a robust source of hope and confidence in a world darkened by murky deed, past and present. It is not hard to see why it is so. Even when we find something immediately upsetting, we can question that response and ask whether it is an appropriate reaction and whether we should really be guided by it. Reasoning can be concerned with the right way of viewing and treating other people, other cultures, other claims, and examining different grounds for respect and tolerance. Thus, Amartya Sen, he makes use of argumentative method, of course, especially about resource distribution. Then the factor of well-being and capabilities to meet the requirement of a democracy and a claim for happiness. From these angles, whether all individuals in the society have access to justice, from this angle he tries to give answer. See, the person, yes, he gives one example, whether it is the maker of the flute who is to be given that flute, or whether it is the person who is skilled to make use of the flute that is to be given with that flute, or whether it is the person who paid for that flute is to be given. See, amidst these three persons, to whom the flute is to be given. See, that gives rise to some argumentative reasoning. And dialectical method of reasoning is the method through which he tries to resolve the issue of justice. Then we come to Upendra Bakshi's book, The Future of Human Rights. It has undergone several editions. Some of his books were not edited subsequently, but this book was edited, and I consider that it has made a very important philosophical contribution to the very understanding of human rights. He is fond of discursivity. He makes use of binaries, dichotomies, because social realities provide for particular type of deviation. Yes, I'm coming. Whereas the guarantee of rights provide for certain ideals. About the market-based rights and the rights which are promised under the international charter, or the consequence of globalization, or the good and bad NGOs, or about the various other issues, he employs dialectical reasoning. See, it is not only the philosophers or writers or academicians who are making use of philosophical research. Philosophical research is amply used in a decisional law or judgments. Look to the judgments like Maneka Gandhi case, or Nandini Sundar, or Keshavananda Bharati, or various cases related to slavery, public interest litigation, or various other such cases. It is possible to find out the philosophical input that is the outcome of thinking that is made by the concerned judge. That's a philosophical research is something indispensable instrument which ought to be made use of by the researcher, and even in the field of social science research, or say empirical research or a non-doctrinal research, it has its own application, because without a sound philosophy, without a sound understanding of jurisprudence, it is very difficult to embark upon the journey of this knowledge generation. See, what we find is that philosophical research is not something unregulated type of thinking. On the other hand, it is something which is anchored to the social reality. In one of the important works, Girish Karnad actually makes this observation, or he writes in this way: how to split branches in stars before rooting firm in the earth. See, before splitting branches in the stars, it is essential that the person should have adequate rootedness in the earth. That is the idea that he is putting forward. Perhaps that idea has its own relevance even in the field of philosophical research. There's amidst various tools that are employed, or various procedures that are employed for philosophical research, we find that it is not possible to select a specific tool and consider it as the tool of philosophical research, because intuition as a method of philosophical research has a severe shortcoming. Then a dialectical method cannot be considered as a very much comprehensive, because so many other aspects should also be taken into consideration. And intuition can be a good starting point, but one should not end with that. And there ought to be subjection to other questioning, etc. That's about the philosophical research. So thank you very much.